few chips of paint that are still original. But that building was there. It was part of Bishop's holding. And but that was it. So there was a farm program in idea form, but it hadn't yet materialized. Dana Gordon came the first year, and this becomes important later on in our story. He was a member of the Seneca Indian tribe, and he came our first year and began to create the garden program. Now, by 2 years later, 1941, the sisters of these little boys had been agitating for a camp of their own. They would come along with their parents to drop off or pick up their brothers, and they got very excited by what they were seeing, and the parents were reporting to my grandparents that their little girls were asking for the same kinds of things. So we started a second camp at the south end of the lake, far apart, and that camp is called Indian Brook. Grandma always said that the point of Indian Brook was that girls can do anything that boys can do. And she noted that she had noticed that when girls and boys were doing things together, sawing wood, chopping wood, that the girls might start out doing the activity, but the boys would quickly step in and take over, and the girls would step back. And she said, that's not right. I don't want that for girls. So, and this was before the word feminist even existed. So Grandma directed Camp Indian Brook for many, many years. There were 12 girls the first year. We were talking in the board meeting yesterday about where we get some of the names for some of our camps, some of the features in the area. So let me tell you why it's called Indian Brook. I mentioned Dana Gordon, who was a Seneca. We had a young man named Wakio Racinus, who was a member of the Mohawk tribe. Wakio's name in his tribe was Flying Cloud. Flying Cloud became one of our camps later on, still is. But Wakio he taught what in those days we called Indian lore. He taught the boys how to, build a fire, how to start a fire without matches. He created what he called Indian Village up the Notch Road, up into Plymouth Notch, the old stagecoach road. For those who are very much immersed in local geography and topography, it's right by Spruce Ledges, was Indian Village. And it was at the edge of a brook, hence the name arose organically. Oh, this is the Indian Brook. So you can see Indian Brook, which is in full spring spate at the moment, just at the bottom of this hill, and the camp at the other side of it then took the name Indian Brook. Where we are became the third camp, became Tamarack Farm. Initially it was called the Senior Work Camp. In year 2 of, still at that time, Merlicht, soon to become Timberlake, working with Dana Gordon, the oldest boys in Ranger's cabin, so called the Rangers, were tasked with coming over here and creating a farm. Remember, the Morgan, Grandpa always said his name was Jabez Morgan. I don't know if that's actually true. That may be apocryphal, but let's just call him Jabez Morgan, Mr. Morgan, or as we call him, Mad Morgan. He had a farm here, so it was not out of the realm of possibility to start one. And they lived here in the sugar house that became their bunkhouse in where this building now is. And they began to create a farm. Sadly, we were talking about fires over lunch. One night, while the boys were out of camp on a hiking trip for several days, the sugar house burned to the ground. Now, neighbors did see this happening. Neighbors along in the cottages the other side of Route 100 and people driving by on Route 100, although it was a dirt road at the time, they saw this fire happening, but apparently, it was learned later, they all said, that's just those camps. They're always burning down one thing or another, so we don't have to worry about it. So nobody called it in. So the sugar house unfortunately burned to the ground. But the result of having lost it was that now it was possible to build a farmhouse here. And if you could build a farmhouse, you could hire a farmer. And if you could hire a farmer, you could have somebody here to plant the crops early enough in the season, because as we know, the Vermont growing season is not all that long, we could plant them early enough that they could be ready to be harvested when the campers were here in camp. So another one of my childhood memories is of getting lectured, honest to gosh, every single time on the best way to eat corn on the cob. Grandpa Ken had a little lecture about this. The best way is to pick it, 2 minutes later you pop it in the boiling water, 3 minutes, and then you eat it. That's the best way to eat corn on the cob. But I'm not sure it was absolutely necessary to tell us that every single time, but that was part of I have a personal theory that each of the camps subsequently was, that each of the camps was created to meet the needs of a particular Webb child or grandchild. So there have been several camps have been created since then. Salt Ash Mountain Camp, which is, we finally took the land up at Nineveh in Mount Holly, which was founded in 1962. Camp Flying Cloud, which is a very primitive camp for boys 12 to 15 years old on the side of Salt Ash Mountain, so also up in Nineveh. We had for a while, my fault, a girls' wilderness outpost camp, also up on Nineveh, called Dark Meadow. Not the most salubrious spot for one, so we laid that down for a while and are now bringing it back in a different form. And the Barn Day Camp, which is located at the most northern end of our property. We also run programs in what's called the shoulder season, late spring and into the fall, using this space here and our beautiful resources as a retreat center. And one of the, as you saw when we circled up, when we did the Sung Grace, and as I hope that you'll pick up even more as you're listening to me talk and talking amongst ourselves, is that throughout all of this has been woven in our Quakerism. So our values of, we call them spices, simplicity, peacemaking, integrity of word and deed, so acting on our inner light, community, equity, and service. It has taken, I was talking with somebody beforehand, saying it has taken 12 purchases to make the entire valley ours. And that was very important to us for reasons of simplicity, peacemaking, integrity, community, equity, and service, to preserve this from developers. We were able to purchase, my grandparents were able to purchase Timberlake, that 100 acres after the first summer in 1939. There was a cabin, within that holding, there was a cabin by where the sauna now is, and that was absolutely, the owner was very willing to sell. That cabin was picked up and moved to where the Timberlake Infirmary was. It became the Timberlake Infirmary. Burned down. But it became the Timberlake Infirmary there by the side of the road, for those who know that. Paradise Island was not one of our original holdings, and we had to buy that. It's right at the edge of the swimming area for Timberlake. The Crandall property at the south end. The Putnam family cottage that I alluded to earlier, where Beaver Lodge now is. The Atwood, or it might be Atwater cottage. Snow Bar, the Baker family willingly sold the cottage that we now call Snow Bar. The Jimmy Hall property on the northwest side, just across from our entrance and going up the hill into, into the Gore. We took and created, we sold lots to people who agreed not to develop them. In fact, Grandpa sold a couple of lots more than once. He had a sense of urgency, so he would sell, and he just couldn't understand why you didn't whip out your checkbook immediately and write the check like right now. And since you hadn't done that, he was certain that you were changing your mind, and he would turn to you, and you were interested, and so he would very happily take your money. And then he would find that he had managed to sell things twice. In 1962, we bought the dam from the Plymouth Aqueduct Company, because by that time, 3 of the 4 mills that created Woodward Reservoir had gone out of existence, and the Bridgewater Woolen Mills went about 10 years later. We were given the opportunity to buy the land from here all the way up the Notch Road to the top of the Notch. We ended up not buying it ourselves, but a member of the Rockefeller family, who was a friend of my grandparents, was willing to buy that and to help us preserve it. I know I'm getting to the end of my time, but I do want to tell this story. As we say in the South, bless her heart, she was a city girl, and she wanted to create a pond, but there was a beaver dam already existing on Indian Brook up on her property, and so she decided that Jay is smiling. She decided that the thing to do was to dynamite it, Grandpa and Grandma had very carefully, they have built a house down right on the lakefront property, and they had very carefully created a pond outside the dining room with ducks on the pond, and Grandpa loved gardening, and so he had irises around it, and it was beautiful. And literally we are sitting at breakfast one morning and we hear this roaring noise. And suddenly this wall of rock and gravel and trees and brush comes roaring down Indian Brook and fetches up in the pond, which is no more. That was the end of that particular story. As we say in the South, bless her heart. There were two final purchases. Where's Midge? The Tucker property along Route 100. Yep. Was the next to the last that helped us fill in the land over there, and it helped us connect two pieces of property that were owned by Jimmy Hall. One is Plymouth Community North, and the other is what we call the Forest Preserve. So I want to wrap up by saying that Grandma was always a huge fan of Grace Coolidge, Mrs. Coolidge, as she called her. And so Grandma served on the board of the Calvin Coolidge Historical Society. And she herself, when she retired from running Indian Brook, and when my grandparents turned Farm and Wilderness into a nonprofit organization, she decided, the woman was 65, and she decided, I'm bored. So she decided to run for the Vermont State Legislature. She was definitely a Democrat, but in those days in Vermont, this may still be true. Well, Bernie, no. In those days, you could not win unless you were a Republican. So she switched her party registration, ran on the Republican ticket, and I remember as a high school student putting what we called licky stickies on envelopes, address labels, and going around with her to meet people. She had a great time in the legislature. Madeline Cunin was her roommate and sat with her. In the legislature, and because Grandma was so connected, she was always taking me off to meet this governor and that senator and saying, yes, I taught him in kindergarten. Yes, I had him in church school. Oh yes, his mother and I grew up together. So, I had a sampler on my wall when I was growing up. Some of us will remember that that's something that little girls we all had. It was something I had inherited it from my grandmother on the other side. And it says, where your treasure is, there shall your heart be also. And that, for me, describes how I feel about this property and farm and wilderness camps, which are inseparable for me. This is where my heart is. This is where my treasure is. And Betsy said that I'm from North Carolina. Oh, no. I'm from here. I live in North Carolina, and I'm married to my beloved, whom I met when I was 8 and he was 9, and he asked me to dance at a square dance. But this is home. This is where my heart is. So thank you so much for sharing some time with me today to hear a little bit more about it. Thank you. I would be happy to take questions if folks have questions. Betsy.
Can you explain to us a little bit the relationship that Farm and Wilderness has with Nineveh?
Yes.
I mean, is Nineveh kind of your umbrella? I'm clueless.
We're laughing because there's a lot of that confusion we know is very common, and because it is very much interwoven. Okay, so let me see if I can do this as simply as possible. Grandpa Ken, once we established Salt Ash Mountain Camp, 1962, noticed that there was a lot of land up at Nineveh, on Lake Nineveh, that also would be ripe for development, and therefore if he could grab it and preserve it, that would be desirable. And again, this is consistent with the Quaker values. He did he created a corporation with shares, right? Not like a Goldman Sachs kind of a corporation, but you could buy a share in this corporation, and you could or could choose not to have lots. But it was all, originally it was all people who were farm and wilderness families, camp parents, alumni, so people who were, sorry, I'm having an allergic reaction to something, and I can feel my eyes are beginning to swell up. So it was all like-minded people, camp families initially, which is part of what the confusion is about, is that they are us, even though they're called the Wilderness Corporation and the Wilderness Community. Some years ago, I can't remember now what Andy said, the Wilderness Corporation dissolved, and then they created a nonprofit foundation called the Nineveh Foundation that is in charge of stewardship of 3,400 acres up on Lake Nineveh, up and around Lake Nineveh. So not only the lake itself, they own the dam, but also all of the property around it. So we lease the land for Camp Flying Cloud from the Nineveh Foundation, even though they are us and we are them. They are us in the sense that, you know, the chair of the Nineveh Foundation and I went to camp together. Right, so, you know, I've seen you running around in your little shorts, so, you know, don't get shirty with me. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a very close relationship, and there are lots of opportunities. Our Girls Wilderness program is up at Nineveh, it's right near, it's not called Tiny Pond Road, it's called Tinney Road, right, near Tinney Road. So there's a very symbiotic relationship. Other questions? Yeah. Then I'm afraid I'll fall asleep. Thank you. I've still got to get home. Thank you. I may do that when I hit the plane.
Kristi, believe it or not, I've never known when we went from Maryland to Farm and Wilderness, and do you know why?
Camp Timberlake.
But right, to Timberlake, but then why this became known as Farm and Wilderness?
It was not until after there was actually, you know, a farm. So it would have been after 1941. I can, however, look it up and see possibly. This is, my grandpa wrote a number of books. And contributed to some edited books. But the last book that he and Grandma wrote before he died, so this was published in 1984, is Beyond Our Wildest Dreams. I have a number of copies of them. They obviously did not come up from North Carolina, but it has the entire history of Farm and Wilderness in it. So if you're interested, please how about we say let Jen know, and I can make sure that for a small contribution to our annual fund, that you get a copy. I'd be happy to give that to you. So you could probably look it up in here and get the exact year. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. You're a good student, Betsy. You're a good student.
Can you describe the campership program?
Yes, I'd be delighted to describe the campership program and how it works. Did you plant her? Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, because one of the feelings that kind of floats around about farm and
course.
wilderness,